The package arrived on a Wednesday. No return address. No markings except for his name, neatly typed on the label. It sat on the kitchen counter for hours, unopened, as he worked through his usual routine, editing footage for a client, sipping coffee gone cold, scrolling through unread emails. When he finally peeled the box open, it contained a single security camera. Sleek, black, high-end. A brand he didn't recognize. Tucked beside it was a small note, typed in the same clinical font as his name on the label. "You forgot something." It didn't make sense. The first assumption was a mistake. Someone must have sent it to the wrong address, though it had his full name, his exact apartment number. A practical joke, maybe? He thought about old friends, but no one came to mind who would pull something this specific. The camera felt cool and smooth in his hands. The lens, an unblinking eye, reflected the dim glow of his monitor. It was strange, but harmless enough. He set it up in the corner of his bedroom, facing the bed. Just to see. That night, sleep came uneasily. A lingering discomfort prickled in his brain, like the feeling of forgetting something important. His dreams were fractured. A hallway, too long. Footsteps that didn't belong to him. A static buzz, growing louder, suffocating. Morning brought dull light and a notification on his phone. Motion detected. Curious, he opened the feed. At first, it was nothing. Just himself, curled beneath the sheets, shifting occasionally. The hours passed in silence. Then, at 3:14 a.m., the screen flickered. A brief distortion, barely noticeable. When the feed returned to normal, something had changed. The bedroom door, locked before he went to sleep, stood slightly open. A small gap. Enough to see the darkness beyond. He rewound the footage, scanning frame by frame. The door was closed. Then the flicker. Then open. No movement. No sign of how it happened. A logical explanation was needed. Maybe the latch didn't catch properly. Maybe a draft pushed it open. The mind could rationalize anything if it tried hard enough. Yet, the next night, it happened again. This time, the door didn't just open. At 3:14 a.m., the feed glitched once more. A flicker. Less than a second. When it cleared, a shape stood in the doorway. Not moving. Not entering. Just standing there. A vague silhouette, tall and thin. No features. No clothing. Just a dark outline against the dim glow of the hallway. It didn't step forward. It didn't tilt its head. It simply watched. And then, another flicker. Gone. The door remained open. The room unchanged. He scoured the footage frame by frame, slowing it down, pausing, enhancing. There was no moment where the figure arrived. One frame, it wasn't there. The next, it was. A static presence. Then another flicker, and it ceased to exist. The rational part of his brain whispered explanations. A glitch in the recording. A trick of light. Compression artifacts. The part of his brain that listened to instinct told him otherwise. That night, he pushed a chair against the door before sleeping. Kept a kitchen knife under the pillow. Left the hallway light on. Still, at 3:14 a.m., the footage glitched. When it cleared, the chair had been moved. And something stood beside the bed. Morning arrived with a dull, pressing silence. The air in the apartment felt thick, like the weight of an unspoken presence still lingered. The footage waited for him. The notification on his phone, motion detected at 3:14 a.m., felt heavier than the previous nights. His thumb hovered over the screen, hesitant. A part of him, the rational part, wanted to delete everything without watching. Erase the proof, move on, pretend the past 2 nights were nothing more than bad dreams. But curiosity was stronger. The video started like before. A sleeping body, the slow rise and fall of breath. Then the glitch. The chair, which had been wedged tightly against the door, was now neatly placed against the wall. Nothing else seemed different at first. But then, just beyond the edge of the frame, barely visible in the darkness, a shape. No sharp details. Just the outline of something standing by the bed. Close. Watching. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It simply was. Then, another flicker. Gone. The footage ended, leaving only a frozen image of his own sleeping form. A quiet dread settled in his chest. There was no sound in the video, no indication that he had felt anything, sensed anything. But deep in his bones, he knew. Something had been there. He spent the next hour checking every lock, every window, every inch of the apartment. Nothing was out of place. No sign of forced entry. No misplaced footprints. The walls felt suffocating, the space smaller than it had ever been. He considered calling someone. The police? What could he even say? That a camera he hadn't ordered was capturing impossible things? That an unknown figure appeared in his room without any proof outside of distorted footage? It would sound insane. Instead, he set up a second camera. One in the living room, angled towards the hallway. Another in the bedroom, but this time closer to the bed. If someone was entering his apartment, if there was a logical explanation for any of this, he needed to see it. Night came slower than usual. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the pipes, felt amplified. The weight of the knife beneath his pillow was both comforting and absurd. He didn't remember falling asleep. But at 3:14 a.m., the camera recorded. The footage began the same way. Motionless sleep, a still room, an unbroken quiet. Then the flicker. When it cleared, something was different. The figure stood at the foot of the bed now. Closer than before. The darkness around it seemed thicker, swallowing the weak glow of the bedside lamp. It didn't move. But then, a second flicker. And suddenly, the figure wasn't alone. Another shape, identical to the first, stood in the doorway. Then another. And another. Each one still. Each one watching. A line of faceless figures, filling the narrow hallway, stretching into the unseen dark beyond the frame. The video glitched again. When it resumed, the room was empty. The hallway, vacant. The only thing left was the frozen image of his sleeping self, untouched. He didn't check the locks this time. He didn't move from the bed. The camera's unblinking eye had already confirmed what he feared most. They didn't need to break in. They were already here. He didn't sleep the next night. The footage played over and over in his mind, the way the figures simply appeared, unmoving, watching. He had tried to reason with himself, tried to rationalize what he had seen. A malfunction in the camera? A side effect of sleep paralysis? But the facts refused to fit into anything that made sense. He would have woken up if someone had entered the apartment. He would have heard footsteps, the creak of the old floorboards. And yet, there had been no sound. Because they didn't enter. They were already there. He left every light on. The cameras remained in place, now joined by his laptop, recording a live feed. If something happened again, this time he wouldn't just review the footage. This time, he would see it in real time. Hours passed. At some point, exhaustion settled in. His eyes burned, lids heavy, body aching for rest. He fought it, forcing himself upright, shaking his hands to keep awake. And then, just past 3 in the morning, the screen flickered. His breath caught. The bedroom feed went black for half a second. When it came back, everything seemed normal. The bed, the dresser, the chair still wedged against the door. But something felt wrong. His eyes darted between the live feed and the room around him, comparing every detail, searching for what had changed. His pulse pounded in his ears. Then he saw it. The mirror. In the reflection, the bed looked exactly as it should, his laptop open, the dim glow of the screen flickering against the walls. But his reflection, his own sleeping body, was wrong. His real self sat rigid in the chair, staring at the screen. But in the reflection, the version of him in the bed was shifting. Breathing. Moving. A trick of the light, he told himself. Just an illusion, a delayed reflection caused by the low-light setting of the camera. But then, his reflection turned its head. A slow, unnatural movement. It turned, as if aware of being watched. As if it had always known. He slammed the laptop shut, heart hammering against his ribs. His body felt ice cold, his limbs stiff. The air in the room had changed. Heavy. Suffocating. A buzzing filled his skull, vibrating behind his eyes. And then, a whisper. Not an audible sound, not something that could be explained. A presence, threading itself into his thoughts like a sliver of ice running down his spine. You forgot something. The same words from the note. The same message. He lunged for the camera, yanking it from its place. His hands shook as he turned it over, inspecting every inch, searching for any sign of who had sent it, why it was here. And then, under the base, scratched into the plastic. A date. 3 years ago. His stomach twisted. The camera wasn't new. It wasn't recently sent. It had been his all along. 3 years ago. The numbers were scratched into the base of the camera, rough and uneven, as if carved in a hurry. The date stared back at him, mocking him. This wasn't a new camera. It had always been here. His breath came short, shallow. He tried to think, tried to remember anything from that time. 3 years ago, he had been living here, in this very apartment. But nothing about a camera. No memory of setting it up. No recollection of why it would be marked with a date. Yet somehow, the moment he read those numbers, something in the air shifted. Like a door creaking open deep in his mind. A noise behind him. Soft. Faint. Not a knock. Not a creak. A breath. He turned so fast his vision blurred, heart hammering against his ribs. The room was empty. The chair still against the door. Nothing disturbed. But the mirror. He forced himself to look. The bed was there. His laptop. The same dim light. Everything in place. But his reflection, his sleeping self, was sitting upright now. Eyes open. Staring at him. A jagged inhale scraped down his throat, sharp and raw. He barely registered the cold sweat dripping down his back. The reflection wasn't frozen, wasn't a delayed trick of the light. It moved. His mirrored self lifted a hand. Slowly. Deliberately. And pointed at the closet. His entire body seized. His mind screamed at him to not turn around, to not look. But something deeper, something instinctual, forced him to move. He turned. The closet door was cracked open. It had been closed before. He was sure of it. A silent pressure built in his skull, like something was pressing against the inside of his head, whispering without words. He stepped closer. The air around the closet was heavy, thick like molasses. Each step felt like wading through something unseen, something that resisted. His fingers trembled as he reached forward, gripping the edge of the door. He pulled it open. Darkness. Not the usual, familiar darkness of an unlit closet. This was deeper. Wrong. The kind of dark that didn't allow shapes, didn't allow the eye to adjust. A void. And then. A flicker. Not from the camera this time. From inside the closet. Like the moment between frames on old film, something shifted. A figure was standing inside. No warning. No movement. Just there. It was him. Not just a resemblance. It was him. Same face. Same clothes. But the eyes. Not reflections. Not mirrors. They stared at him, too wide, too focused. And then the thing inside the closet smiled. A slow, curling stretch of lips that didn't belong on his face. A sudden wave of nausea hit, a sickness curling through his stomach like rot. His body screamed to move, to run, but his limbs wouldn't respond. The thing in the closet tilted its head. And then it spoke. No sound. No voice. But the words were there. Inside his head. You forgot something. A lurch in his chest, like the air had been ripped from his lungs. A sudden pressure behind his eyes, like something trying to push its way in. His body jerked backward. He hadn't meant to move, hadn't even commanded his legs to step away, but something pulled him, forcing distance between himself and the thing that wore his face. The closet door slammed shut. He stumbled, nearly falling, gasping for air. His vision blurred, heart pounding against his ribs so hard it hurt. The room was still. The mirror was normal again. His reflection back in bed, unmoving. The laptop screen had gone dark. The camera was still in his hands, but the weight of it felt different now. Like it had always been there. Like it had always been watching. And somewhere deep in his skull, buried beneath the static hum of his own thoughts, the whisper remained. You forgot something. He wasn't sure how long he stood there. The room had settled back into its eerie stillness, but something had shifted, something irreversible. The whisper wasn't gone. It was waiting. The camera in his hands felt heavier than before. His fingers tightened around it, desperate for something solid, something real. The closet door remained shut, but he knew better than to believe it was empty. His reflection in the mirror lay still now. Passive. As if nothing had happened. But he knew. It was waiting too. A creeping sickness curled in his gut, spreading through his limbs like slow poison. He needed to get out. Needed to leave the apartment, the cameras, the impossible figures watching from the edges of his perception. But where would he go? The hallway beyond his bedroom felt unfamiliar now, like stepping into a place he had lived in his entire life but never truly known. The air felt thick, suffocating, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. Still, he moved. The apartment was silent, the kind of silence that listens. Each step toward the front door felt like walking deeper into something unseen, something that had always been there. Then, a new notification. His phone vibrated against his palm. New footage available. His breath hitched. The footage should have ended when he turned off the laptop. But the camera had kept recording. He told himself not to open it. Not to look. But his thumb moved before he could stop it. The video began. At first, it showed only his room. The bed. The laptop. The mirror reflecting nothing but stillness. Then the usual flicker. When the image returned. He was in the frame. Standing in the center of the room. But he wasn't there. Not physically. Not in reality. But the footage showed him, standing exactly where he had been moments ago. His breathing quickened, eyes flicking between the phone and his surroundings. His real self was in the hallway now, near the front door. But on the screen. He was still in the bedroom. Watching. A glitch, he told himself. A delay in the feed. And then the figure in the footage turned its head. Slow. Deliberate. Not toward the camera. Toward him. Not in the video. Him. His skin went ice cold. His mouth felt dry. The recorded version of himself smiled. A slow, curling movement of lips. Then, without breaking eye contact, it stepped forward. Out of frame. Out of view. The realization hit like ice in his veins. If the figure wasn't in the video anymore, where was it now? A soft creak behind him. The sound of a single footstep. Close. Too close. His body locked up, every muscle frozen in the primal terror of knowing something was behind him but not wanting to see. But something deep inside him knew. Knew that if he turned, if he met its gaze, it would be too late. Another whisper slithered into his thoughts, curling around his mind like cold fingers pressing against his skull. You forgot something. Not a warning. A reminder. Then the lights flickered. For less than a second, everything went dark. And when they came back, the camera in his hands was gone. And something else was breathing in the room with him.